All right, it's been 108 days since the NFL draft ended, and it's been at least a couple months since I talked about this 2025 rookie class at length. We've had training camp, we've had some preseason action, so I thought this would be a good time to revisit the rankings and update expectations based on what we've learned so far. My name is Paul, this is Pure Potential. If you enjoyed today's video, make sure to subscribe to the channel, leave a like, leave a comment, let's go. All right, I'm not going to waste a lot of time here at the top of the list because things really start to get interesting as you get more into that second, third, fourth round of rookie drafts. Ashton Jeanty remains alone at the top of this list. I don't care that he had 3 carries for -1 yards in a preseason game. He is still right there in that early to mid second round startup conversation. He's in consideration for the first round of redraft leagues. I think he's going to dominate right away as both a rusher and a receiver for the Raiders. In tier 2, we've got Amarian Hampton, Ted McMillan, and Travis Hunter. No new names here, though they are in a little bit of a different order than the first time I did this exercise. And I actually feel even better about all the players in this tier than I did even when they were drafted. Starting with Hampton, I'm wishing all the best to Najee Harris, but him missing all this time in training camp, in preseason, potentially even early games in the regular season, that's just giving Hampton even more of a chance to take over this backfield right away. I always thought he was going to at some point. He's a first-round pick. I think he's better than Najee Harris in pretty much every way, but now there's just this possibility that we see RB1 type usage from him from game 1. So he was already my RB4 in Dynasty. I'm even more excited to get him in seasonal formats, and I think he's going to be a plug-and-play option right away. And then with McMillan, by all accounts, he has immediately stepped in to be that alpha wide receiver the Panthers so desperately need. He looked great in the preseason game, and I mean, this is what we should have really expected from him. He was a very good prospect. He was a top 10 pick in the draft, but one thing that has me even more excited, just a little bit of research from Ryan Heath over at Fantasy Points. He points out that Dave Canales, head coach of the Panthers, loves to funnel volume to the X receiver. You look at Mike Evans, even Deontay Johnson, for the brief time that he was sane and playing for the Panthers, he used a lot of horizontal breaking routes for these X receivers, and that led to a lot of fantasy production. So I think McMillan's going to slide into a very fantasy-friendly role right away. Bryce Young looks good as well. So super high upside here with McMillan. And then Hunter, he was originally my 102, and I still think you can justify taking him that high. I have these guys back to back to back. If I was on the clock tomorrow, I could not tell you for sure that I wouldn't still take him because I think he's an amazing player. The comments and the actions of the team still indicate to me that he's primarily going to be an offensive player. It still feels like the defense is more of a secondary concern. He played basically all the snaps with the first team offense in their first preseason game. He played 0 snaps with the first team defense. And I've been really encouraged by his deployment in that game, playing as primarily a slot wide receiver. That's a very fantasy-friendly role in Liam Cohn's offense. I don't need to remind you of what Chris Godwin did a year ago, playing that slot role for Liam Cohn. He averaged nearly 14 points per game just from the slot on like 52% of the routes. So that's a high floor role for him, and I think it suits his skill set very well. I only moved him down to 4 because my confidence in Hampton and McMillan has grown, not because I've lost any confidence in Hunter's role or ability. It is wheels up for all 3 of these guys as far as I'm concerned. And then my third tier is just 2 players. It starts to kind of open up and the tiers get much broader as we move down the board, but I think it's just Trevion Henderson and Cam Ward here in tier 3. I originally had Ward ahead of Henderson, and I don't have anything negative to say about Cam Ward. It's just that I'm extremely bullish on Trevion Henderson, and I've grown even more confident in that evaluation as we've moved through the summer into the preseason. He is an excellent pass protector and receiving threat. We saw his explosiveness on display on that kick return touchdown, and it's worth noting that he was in an even split with Ramondre Stevenson right from the start of the first preseason game. He caught 3 passes with the first team offense. I think it's safe to say he's already a co-starter for this team, and he's going to have a solid role from the jump. And I think that gap's only going to grow as the season progresses because I just think he's an incredible player. The upside for him is absolutely through the roof. With Cam Ward, my opinion hasn't changed. I didn't draft him a lot during rookie drafts, and I thought he was kind of a player to avoid when his ADP was more like 3 or 4. But now that he's kind of settled in behind McMillan, behind Hunter, behind Hampton in startups, and he's going more in that quarterback oasis that I talked about in the startup guide around players like Purdy, McCarthy, Penix, I think that's right where he belongs. think there's a lot of reason to be excited about his upside at that price. Now, if you're enjoying this video so far, I just want to remind you one more time to hit that subscribe button down below. It's going to make sure you're up to date on whatever is going on in the world of Dynasty Fantasy Football all throughout the NFL season. I'll be posting new videos each and every week, help you stay on top of players you want to be buying, players you want to be selling, and how to kind of maneuver your roster to put yourself in position to win a Dynasty championship. Now in tier 4, we have 4 players. The first 2, Colston Loveland and Emeka Egbuka. And I want to remind you now, since we haven't had any tight ends yet, I'm assuming this is tight end premium. That is the default that I go to when I do my rankings: Superflex, PPR, tight end premium. And so that's why Loveland sits so high on this list. He would not be this high if it was not tight end premium. I would have him firmly behind Emeka Egbuka and probably RJ Harvey as well. But here in tight end premium, I think there's just a lot of upside for Loveland to potentially become that third difference-making tight end that we kind of hoped Sam Laporta was going to be before he took a little bit of a step back last year with the emergence of Jamison Williams. Very high on Loveland as a prospect. He was my tight end 1 of the class coming out. He ends up getting drafted in the top 10 to, what we hope is a high-flying, creative passing game. Ben Johnson has said nothing but nice things about the guy, and we know that he can say mean things because he's said plenty of negative things about Luther Burden, but not Colston Loveland. And then Emeka Egbuka is another guy that the coaching staff, even Baker Mayfield himself, have been raving about all offseason. He was a really, really solid wide receiver prospect, gets that first-round capital, and the knock on both of these guys coming out, I feel like, was that they were being drafted to these fairly crowded situations, but I think both actually have the chance to be really involved from day one. Loveland is already running as the clear starting tight end for the Bears. There is no pretending that Cole Kmet is still the starter, and I like that about Ben Johnson. He wants the best players on the field to make plays. That's going to bode well for Colston Loveland. And then the Buccaneers, they run a ton of 11 personnel, and Godwin might not even be ready for the start of the season. So I think we're going to see Egbuka also in essentially a full-time role from week 1. So both of these guys are going to have a chance to gain a lot of value right away. And then in my mind, there's sort of a little half tier break, not a full tier break, but a gap for me before we get to these next 2 players, Tyler Warren and RJ Harvey. Again, I preferred Loveland as a prospect to Warren, but that's not to take anything away from the guy. I think he's really impressive in his own right. He also got that really early draft capital. Right now, it's largely situation that is separating these 2 guys. I just don't think there's going to be enough volume to go around for Tyler Warren to really dominate in year 1. And you might look at their situations and say, the competition is comparable. You could even say that Loveland has more target competition. I would agree with you there. The difference is the upside of the passing game. I just think the Bears could attempt a lot more passes than the Colts. Anthony Richardson is going to play at some point, even if and when Daniel Jones starts. They're still going to lean on Jonathan Taylor. I think there's going to be a big difference in the overall passing volume. And so I think you really need Warren to emerge as the clear number 1 target for the Colts to gain a ton of value right away. That's not something I really expect to happen. So I have him penciled in as more of maybe a buy candidate in the mid to late season if this passing game just isn't working. And then we close this tier out with RJ Harvey, who, despite being listed as the RB5 on the team's first unofficial depth chart, emphasis on unofficial, he dominated first team reps in the first preseason game. He played like 67% of the snaps with the starters, J.K. Dobbins mixed in for the rest. I've always felt that Harvey was going to be the clear lead back for the Broncos. I never really understood the concerns about J.K. Dobbins because, like with Harvey, we're talking about an excellent prospect, drafted in round 2, versus a journeyman running back who signed for very little money in June. Dobbins was not particularly good last year. After his first couple of games, he kind of ran out of steam. It's not his fault. He suffered a lot of injuries in his career, but I think it's really sapped a lot of his juice. And he ranked very poorly in a lot of advanced metrics, like from week 3 on. Yeah, I know he handled volume, but he was not that impressive on the volume. I think Harvey is just so obviously the guy the team wants to feature. The usage in the first preseason game backs that up. If RJ Harvey was 21, 22 years old instead of already being 24, I'd have him up closer to Trevion Henderson in these rankings because the upside in this offense is very, very exciting. Just forget what you saw from Javonte Williams last year. No play caller was getting high-end fantasy production out of that guy, but he was still 5th in the league in running back targets, and that's the type of role that's been vacated that RJ Harvey is capable of filling. We're going to kick off tier 5 with Jackson Dart. Looked good in his first preseason game. Love to see that touchdown pass. You want rookies to be making good plays when they get the chance, obviously. That being said, nothing about my evaluation has really changed here. I still think we're going to see Dart installed as the Giants starter by mid-season. I just think the schedule is too brutal. The team is not going anywhere with Russell Wilson. I think they have to get Dart in there sooner than later, frankly, as an opportunity for Brian Daboll to save his job. But once Dart gets in there, he's fairly mobile. He has Malik Neighbors. The upside case here is really obvious. You know, when you get a rookie quarterback with decent draft capital, if they play even remotely well, they gain value. The reason that he's still in this tier and not the tier above is that I do also see a downside case, which is that the Giants have a brutal schedule. They don't have like an insanely strong roster. I think they could still lose a lot of games this year. I think that Brian Daboll could absolutely be fired just because he's been with the team for a while and they haven't had any success the last few years. And then if they clean house, they get rid of Daboll, they get rid of the GM, there's a very deep quarterback class in 2026. I think there is at least some risk that a new regime comes in and just re-rolls the position if Jackson Dart doesn't show us a lot of promise right away. So I don't think we're guaranteed a full 2-year audition for Jackson Dart like we would be generally with like a highly drafted first-round quarterback. So I'm still being a little bit cautious, but he does belong here at the top of tier 5, right on that verge of like late first, early second value, followed up by Luther Burden, who's definitely a high variance prospect. There's a lot to like about Burden as a prospect, but there are also some red flags. I am happy leaning into the potential upside here. His skill set in the Ben Johnson offense could just be a perfect match. So don't have to say a whole lot about Burden. I just think he's well worth the price of admission where he typically is valued. And I follow him up with Matthew Golden. If his preseason usage and Packers family night usage is any indication, Matthew Golden's already a full-time wide receiver for the Packers. And that's a big deal when you're talking about Matt LaFleur because he loves to rotate these guys. Meanwhile, the team continues to pigeonhole Jaden Reed into this slot-only role. And now he's injured. So the runway is clear for Golden. You know, I still don't love him as a prospect. I think pretty glaring holes in his college production, but he's going to get his chance to play, and he's got a good quarterback, and he's got a good play caller. I think that's enough with the first-round capital to put him here. And then we go to Caleb Johnson, who I feel like is quickly becoming one of the rookies that I diverge the most from consensus on. My take on Caleb Johnson this whole time has been that I think he's a good rusher, but I struggle to see his upside case in this offense. But he didn't look great in his first preseason action, at least to my eyes and the eyes of a lot of people on Twitter that were saying the same thing. He did drop a pass that hit him in the hands. He did really struggle in pass protection. Those are both things that have been noted kind of throughout camp, especially about pass protection. I have been consistent in my belief that Jaylen Warren is going to remain heavily involved as a pass catcher, as a pass protector. He's still going to mix in for some carries. Everything we've seen so far out of training camp and preseason supports that. I'm not declaring Caleb Johnson a bust or anything, but at the end of the day, he is a third-round pick. Just like last year, we saw Trey Benson, Blake Corum, and Marshawn Lloyd go in the third round. It's cool to run out to the best-case scenario for these players. And sure, there is a decent amount of opportunity that could be seized even with Jaylen Warren there, but there's also downside where a player like Johnson just doesn't get the usage that you're hoping for. And for that reason, I do have him ranked a little bit low, where I feel like the general feeling is just, yeah, pencil him in for 225 carries or whatever. I don't know if I'm ready to go that far. And we actually have a few more names in this group: Jaden Higgins, Quinshon Judkins, and Trey Harris. I don't have to say a lot about Higgins. He's ranked pretty close to where I had him initially. He's had a strong drumbeat throughout camp, and that's helped him to flip Trey Harris. I also have some other reasons for moving Harris down a little bit. But yeah, I mean, he's probably going to start as the third wide receiver for the Texans with Christian Kirk maybe getting a little bit of veteran deference there, but he's absolutely going to have the opportunity to cement himself as the number 2 option for CJ Stroud. With Quinshon Judkins, he's obviously the big faller since draft day. I think some people are still understating the downside risk for him. He's still not under contract. We still have no clear idea of when this legal situation is going to resolve. Best case, he signs some kind of a plea agreement, signs his contract, and then gets a 6-game suspension. But if that happens, you're talking about Judkins practicing with the team for the first time in week 7. And at that point, he's going to have to then learn the playbook, and he's going to have to get eased into the offense. He's jumping onto a moving train, as I believe Jacob Sanderson put it. And so this feels like kind of a lost season for him like basically no matter what. And that's not even including outcomes where he gets put on the exempt list first and then gets a suspension, or he gets a suspension longer than 6 games, or maybe this legal case just doesn't get resolved and he doesn't sign his contract at all this year. I think there's a lot of ways this can go wrong, and I don't think there's that many ways that it can go right. So I've moved him down a lot. I think you can even argue he should be even lower. But this is not really a guy that I'm tempted to buy low on. Frankly, most of the trades that I've seen are kind of like fake buy lows. Like, I've seen multiple people be able to trade him for future first round picks. I'm absolutely doing that. And I think you can still get a lot of these rookies that are ranked ahead of him straight up, because I think people are just like, whatever, he's going to get his 6 games and then everything's going to be the same as it was before. That's not how I see it at all. And then we finish up with Trey Harris. I think it was really exciting when he was drafted to the Chargers, but I haven't really seen a lot since to kind of keep me excited. He hasn't separated from Quentin Johnston yet. QJ rested with the starters preseason game 1. Trey Harris did not, which, to be clear, that's not excitement for Quentin Johnston. That's just more like negative for Harris that he hasn't been able to establish himself yet. Then we have the Rashawn Slater injury, which I think is kind of a knock to the whole offense, but certainly for more of the peripheral pieces than anyone else. Then we have this Keenan Allen signing, which is really tricky because they're either going to put Keenan in the slot, which will push Ladd McConkey outside and take away potential snaps for Harris, for Quentin Johnston, for anyone else that was kind of penciled in for those outside routes. Or if they try to play Keenan Allen outside, I think that's going to be a total disaster. But regardless, you'll have Ladd in the slot, Keenan outside. So no matter how these guys get deployed, the addition of Keenan Allen just makes the math more difficult. It's harder to see how Harris carves out a larger role. And then finally, you have Keandre Lambert-Smith, who we're going to talk about in a later tier, but he's been making noise. I've heard more about him making big plays in camp than Trey Harris. So, even with all these factors, I haven't moved Harris down more than like half a tier. Like, he's still sitting here in tier 5, which I think is exactly where I had him the first time around. It's still easy to envision him becoming the wide receiver 2 by the end of the season. It's just that things are a little bit murkier. And so that's why I have deferred to Jaden Higgins. It's why I've moved Golden a little bit further ahead of him. It's not full on panic mode, to be clear. I think it's a mistake when we go into full on panic mode on rookies when it's still early in August. Like, the expectation should be a slow start, but there are some factors that have gotten in the way that make me a little bit less excited. Then we kick off tier 6 with Baishal Tutin. And to be clear, like, in my heart, Baishal Tutin is still in the previous tier, which is where I had him ranked the first time I did this. I'm still quite optimistic on him. I still have him ranked way ahead of the consensus, which I think is the important takeaway here. I'm still buying Baishal Tutin. I'm buying him anywhere I can get him, really. He looked like the best running back in the game for the Jaguars in the first preseason game. He has apparently gotten a little bit of first team work since then. Maybe they liked what they saw. Maybe they want to get him more involved. But the reason he's dropped is just when he was drafted, I figured there was at least some chance that he could open the season as the starter because it was a new coach coming in. They didn't have any prior loyalty to the other backs there. ETN could have been traded. He could have been, just kind of marginalized. There was no guarantee that Tank Bigsby was going to be able to build on that sort of limited sample of high-end efficiency he showed us last year. I thought there was some chance that Tutin could just be like the co-starter, 1B type of guy from day one. I think that opportunity is mostly off the table at this point, and so it's only fair that I move him down a little bit, that I temper expectations a little bit. But I'm still very optimistic that he can carve out a nice role for himself over the course of the season, and so I do remain an optimist on Baishal Tutin. And we're following that up with Jalen Milroe, another kind of shoot for the stars player. I understand he can be a tough guy to invest in because there's some odds that he just never starts an NFL game. But I think the upside here is so valuable. It honestly feels a little bit like Jalen Hurts. Obviously, I don't think Milroe is quite the same caliber of passer coming out, but he's also sitting behind a worse incumbent in Sam Darnold. But you look at Sam Darnold, he's on essentially a one-year deal behind a bad offensive line with a fairly lackluster group of pass catchers outside of JSN. It's not crazy to think that Sam Darnold could be benched late if Seattle is out of the playoff race. And if the team isn't in a position to draft a quarterback early next year, who's to say they don't try out Milroe? Like, I think they could finish kind of middle of the pack. They could give Milroe like 2 or 3 games late in the year, and then they don't really know what to do at quarterback, so they just let him start. I understand that's not the most likely path for him, but you also have outs due to injury. You also have outs where he just plays really well. And if he's on the field, He's pretty much an instant QB1. That's the thing that I think has to be highlighted here. It's not like any other developmental quarterback that's on the bench. Because of his mobility, because of how much he's going to run, if he's on the field, you can start him. And that's the appeal that we've had with guys like Fields or Richardson, where they've held a lot of value, even though they haven't looked good. It's because of that immediate usability. So I think Milroe has that. I think he's worth valuing for that reason. And I'm going to follow him with Kyle Williams, Cam Scatterbo, and Dylan Sampson to finish out this tier. With Kyle Williams, it seems like every day I hear a report that he's tearing up camp. I know he's not officially a starter yet, but I don't think the Patriots are going to be able to keep him off the field the way that he's just always open. Like, genuinely watching his tape from the preseason game where he didn't catch any passes, he's just open on like every route. I think there's a ton of opportunity there next to Stephon Diggs to carve out a role. So definitely optimistic on Kyle Williams. And then Cam Scatterbo is another guy that I'm a bit lower on than the market. And I don't feel amazing about it, but the way that I see this, Tyrone Tracy has been kind of reported as the clear starter throughout the process. Now Scatterbo's hurt, so he's going to be starting behind the 8 ball. And you might say that's exactly the same as Bishal Tuten, where he's not the starter either. The difference for me is just the environment and the organizational stability. If Bishal Tuten can ascend in the Liam Cohen offense, his upside is ridiculously high. And I think because we're almost guaranteed to see continuity from one year to the next with Liam Cohen, he'd have a better chance of sticking around as a day 3 guy. Meanwhile, the Giants offense just doesn't project to be as running back friendly. Like, for Cam Scatterbo to hit like a legitimately high ceiling, like some kind of like an RB1 ceiling, he would have to pretty much phase Tracy completely out and become a total bell cow. And then even if that happens, if the team isn't good and Brian Daboll gets fired, any progress that he made towards locking down the starting job could be lost if we see a new coach come in, new offensive coordinator, and they want to change things up. So I just think Tuten has a little bit more of an inside track to both the fantasy-friendly usage and the staying power as a day 3 running back than Scatterbo does. That being said, would I be surprised if he ends up being the better of the two? If he comes back from the injury and he forces his way into a bigger role? Absolutely not. And that's why they're in the same tier. I don't think there's some big gap between them, but that is why I prefer one over the other. And then Dylan Sampson is kind of a big riser, and it corresponds with Judkins dropping, obviously. He's a good prospect. I wasn't in love with him because he wasn't much of a pass catcher in college, but now he's going to get this extended runway to prove that he can be the lead guy for the Browns. And that's huge. I think Judkins is almost a lock to miss at least 6 games, and that means Sampson's going to get at least 6 games to show that he's a guy the team wants to lean on. And if he looks good in those 6 weeks, why can't he just hold on to that role if/when Judkins comes back? It's not like the team's going to say, well, we have this 4th round rookie running back who looks amazing, but we did draft this, 2nd round running back who's already causing us problems and hasn't practiced with the team all year. I guess we have to install him as the starter right away. I don't think that's how it works. Dylan Sampson could just be a better player than Quinshon Judkins, and he could just keep the job. So I think you have to price in that type of upside, and that's how he gets moved all the way up here into tier 6. All right, now there's a ton of players in these last 2 tiers because we're trying to get up to 48 rookies. So I'm going to try to move through these pretty quickly, and I'm actually going to change these labels here. We're going to say tier 7/8 and then tier 9 because I kind of pushed 2 tiers together so that they would fit on the screen in a more aesthetically pleasing way. But I will let you know where that gap is between tier 7 and tier 8 so that you can sort of mentally separate them. Because in tier 7, we're looking at more like late 2nd round value type of guys, where then we get to tier 8, it's more like early 3rd round value, which isn't like a massive difference, but I think it's worth pointing out. We kick it off with Terrence Ferguson, who was one of the higher drafted tight ends in this class, can kind of do it all. He was highly touted by Max Toscano, who writes a really good column that I enjoy. Remember the tight ends over on Substack. The Rams love this guy. I think it's likely they would have drafted him in round 1 if they had to, if they didn't get that chance to trade down. And I'm not valuing him as a 1st rounder because he obviously wasn't drafted in the 1st round, but I think it's a good chance that he can supplant Tyler Higbee sooner than later. The Rams offense can be very consolidated. And right now it's consolidated mostly around Puka Nacua and Devontae Adams, but Adams isn't going to be there forever. There's a chance that Ferguson could establish himself as the 2nd target, sooner rather than later. Then we get to Jack Besh, another one of the big fallers in the rankings. I hate to move him down so much before he really gets a chance to play, but the reporting has been very consistent. He is firmly behind Trey Tucker and Deontay Thornton in camp. If it was just Trey Tucker, I could chalk it up to veteran deference and I could mostly ignore it. But Thornton is a fellow rookie who has fully leapfrogged Jack Bech for first team work. And Thornton wasn't even productive in college. I don't think he's going to light up the box score, even if he is the starter. We'll get to him later. But he can run really fast in a straight line, and I think that's something the Raiders clearly value. In my original rankings, I did bring up concerns that Bech could be redundant with Bowers and Myers, and I think that's coming to fruition here, and it's why he's struggling to get on the field. And then we have Jalen Noel, who I haven't really heard a lot about since he was drafted. He's a decent prospect. He got decent draft capital. He's now 4th in the pecking order, though, for the Texans. Christian Kirk has been working with the ones all offseason, and he's not a star player, but he's been solid throughout his career. I think he's a good enough player. If he's healthy and he's on the field, I think he's good enough to keep Noel on the bench pretty much all season if he's healthy. The thing I like about Noel is that he's basically got three-way contingent upside, because you've got Nico, you've got Higgins, you've got Kirk. Offensive coordinator Nick Caley comes from the Rams. They've always run a ton of 11 personnel, and they've always been very consolidated in their formations. They let the same players run a lot of the routes. And so I think they're going to run a ton of 11. And I think if one of these guys suffers an injury, Noel could just be thrust into pretty much a full-time role right away. Kind of like we saw with Jordan Whittington last year on the Rams when Puka was hurt. That's what I see for Noel, except I think he can legitimately fill in, at least in the slot and in the Z. If Nico was to get hurt, maybe you see Higgins tried out at the X, and then Noel takes whatever position Higgins was playing. Either way, I think there's outs for him. I also think he's kind of a wait-and-see type of player. And then we close out the first half of this tier 7, with Tyler Shough, who's been really shaky throughout training camp. I think he still has a chance to start week 1, but I would probably bet on Spencer Rattler starting if I had to right now. Even if Rattler does start, he's not going to hold the job all year. I think that's really unlikely. But in my most recent rankings update, Shough just barely held on to that late second valuation, because I think the team did make enough of an investment in him that they're going to give him a fair shot at some point, unless Rattler is just significantly better. So still think we see him start sometime this year. The weapons there are not terrible. Kellen Moore, has some juice as a play caller. So, I'm not excited, but you've got a decent shot at a starting quarterback there. And then this is where we transition into the second tier within this tier. Tier 8, we get into guys where I'm not going out and trading second round picks for these players. I think that's a little bit too cute, but I'm interested. I'm intrigued. Some of these guys are probably going to hit some level of upside where that price might be justified, but there's also a lot of downside. There's a lot of zero risk here. And we're going to start it out with Harold Fannin, a tight end that I was out on early in the process because I thought he was going to be really expensive in rookie drafts. And then he went in the 3rd round to a pretty good spot, decent spot for what he offers, because he's a tight end that can play in the slot. The Browns don't have a good slot wide receiver. I think Kevin Stefanski is going to be willing to kind of move him around a little bit. He's also gotten some positive reviews, and yet his value has kind of just stayed stagnant. I drafted him a lot in the 3rd and even the 4th round of rookie drafts. In tight end premium leagues, I'm interested in Harold Fannin, and he's followed closely by Mason Taylor. And I think the consensus is pretty strongly Taylor over Fannin. I wasn't that impressed with Taylor as a prospect. Fannin was just infinitely more productive. I know it was at a small school, but he was actually insanely productive in college. Taylor's much more of a projection at the next level. He's starting his rookie year now with a high ankle sprain in a passing offense I want to avoid at all costs. So he's just not a guy that I'm really going after very aggressively. Then we get another Brown. The 4th Brown on this list somehow is Shedeur Sanders. Kenny Pickett got hurt. Dylan Gabriel got hurt. That's really opened the door for Shedeur Sanders. He still hasn't gotten any work with the ones, but he made some decent plays in game 1, some stuff to build on. The team is not going anywhere with Joe Flacco. So I think there's a good chance we're going to see Sanders get an extended audition at some point this year. And with the truthers that he has, he's got a good chance to gain value. So he's a guy I want to be stashing. Even if I'm not a huge believer that he's going to be some big hit, I just think it makes sense in Superflex to have guys like that on your bench. And then the rest of this tier is running backs with just one exception. I'm going to throw everybody else on the screen here. Jaden Blue, DJ Giddens, Ja'Cory Krosky-Merritt, Elijah Arroyo, Kyle Monangai, Jarquez Hunter. Blue is in a wide open backfield situation, which is great. He's more of a pass catcher than a rusher, which is why I don't have him ranked higher. Like if you took Giddens, somebody with a more traditional profile, and put them on the Cowboys, I'd be much more excited. I'm just not totally convinced that Blue can actually be that guy. The good news for him is that he's super fast, and no one else on the team is a good rusher either. So I don't know if the ceiling is crazy high, but there's plenty of upside for him at his cost. Giddens is more of a straight handcuff. He has kind of solidified his position as Jonathan Taylor's backup, which is great. And I liked him as a prospect. There's just not a lot. You just can't move a pure handcuff much higher than this. Like his whole case is just, will Taylor get hurt? And the answer is, I don't know. So he sits here. Ja'Cory Krosky-Merritt is the biggest riser of this group. He's an older prospect. He fell to round 7 due to a weird eligibility issue that prevented him from playing out his final college season. But there's been a steady drumbeat out of training camp. The offense is good, and Brian Robinson is not an insurmountable obstacle. It's not totally out of the realm of possibility that JCM could push his way into a starting role over the course of the season. Kind of like we saw Brian Robinson do to Antonio Gibson a couple of years ago. I think it could be kind of similar to that. Then we have Elijah Arroyo, a guy I've talked about as a sell. I know that this feels low, and maybe it is a little bit low, but I think people are just ignoring the presence of AJ Barner, who is a significant obstacle here because the team wants to run the ball. Barner is a legitimate blocker, and Arroyo is not. I just don't see him playing anything close to a full-time role, at least not as a rookie, and that's why I'm leading into the running backs. I think this is like a worse version of the Dawson Knox, Dalton Kincaid situation in an offense that I don't have a lot of faith in. And you might be wondering, sure, that's all fine and good. How do you have Fannin ranked so much higher than Arroyo? Isn't he also a backup tight end? Isn't he also in kind of a part-time role where he's not a blocker? The answer is yes. I just liked him more as a prospect because he was absolutely prolific in college. The other thing is that I think the Browns offense is just going to be more pass heavy. And unlike Arroyo, who has to compete with JSN and Cooper Kupp to get reps out of the slot, Harold Fannin has to compete with Deontay Johnson and another slot receiver whose name I can't even think of right now, Jamari Thrash, I believe. Judy and Tillman are primarily going to be outside guys. That opens up a lot more space for Fannin to get on the field and get in the slot, whereas I think it'll be a bigger challenge for Elijah Arroyo. Then we have Kyle Monangai. I don't have a lot of strong feelings about him as a talent. He's seemingly worked his way, though, into the RB2 discussion already. I think Roschon Johnson is injured right now, and DeAndre Swift and Roschon Johnson are about the weakest backfield competition that you can find. So, running back friendly offense, path to touches. It's a pretty simple formula here with Monangai. And then we get to Jarquez Hunter. Last guy in the tier, somebody I was really excited to draft before the Kyren Williams extension. Definitely knocks him down a little bit because, Kyron's not going anywhere in the immediate future now. I still think Jarquez Hunter has a good chance to steal the primary backup job away from Blake Corum. And the key here, he has an explosive ability that I think could get him on the field in a change of pace role, whereas Blake Corum is more duplicative with Kyren Williams. Like, they're basically just the same guy. Hunter, I think, brings something unique to the table. And so he has clearly fallen behind some of these other running backs with paths to touches, but I still think Hunter has a chance to push his way into some work this year. And that could benefit him if there was an injury to Kyren Williams. As we get into the final tier here, this is deep stash territory. I am not trading anything of value for these players yet, certainly nothing more than a future third. But I do want to roster these guys anywhere that I can because there is upside here. And some of these guys could hit exciting outcomes or at least be startable for different times of the year. And we're going to start out with Brashard Smith, a versatile player, big-time receiving weapon. He's got a creative play caller in Andy Reid that can maximize his skill set. His competition is fragile. There's a lot to like here. The problem right now is that he's not even a lock to make the roster. But if he does, it's interesting. He's got some Jerick McKinnon to his game. Then we get to Oronde Gadsden for the Chargers. Very intriguing receiving prospect. He's almost more wide receiver than tight end. He's gotten a positive drumbeat throughout training camp. The issue is just Where did the touches come from? He's in a committee kind of with Will Dissly and Tyler Conklin. There's a bunch of other wide receivers that are demanding looks, but the hope with Gadsden is just that he could emerge as a receiving threat over the course of the season. Torrey Horton is a guy who might be able to get on the field sooner than later. You never want to get too excited about day 3 wide receivers, especially in August. But Horton definitely flashed in his first preseason game. He's been getting some first team reps with MVS out. He offers a vertical element as an outside wide receiver that you're just not getting from JSN or Cup. That gives him a good chance to get on the field. And for whatever it's worth, he probably only fell to day 3 due to injuries. So definitely a guy I'm keeping my eye on. This guy I'm mixing in late in best ball drafts. He does feel a little bit like a better in best ball type of player, but an interesting guy nonetheless. Then we have Taj Brooks. Looks like the primary backup to Chase Brown with Samaje Perine playing the third down role. There's not going to be a standalone role here because Chase Brown is going to take a ton of touches. Perine's going to get the rest in his specialist role. But Zach Moss was cut. That's a good sign. And it means that there should be a decent bit of contingent upside with Brooks. Then we have Pat Bryant. I thought he, as a third round pick, could carve out more of a role early on, but he's been kind of buried on the depth chart. So he's really just a shot in the dark at this point. Jalen Royals, kind of in a similar boat. He's been getting a little more run than Bryant because the Chiefs' top 3 wide receivers are all banged up. It's still kind of hard for me to see where he factors in with Rice, Hollywood, Worthy, Kelsey all on the field. But 4th round draft capital is not terrible. It's a good offensive environment, and so he's worth the stash. Ollie Gordon for the Dolphins. It's really unfortunate, but Alexander Mattison did suffer a season-ending neck injury, and that really opens things up for Ollie Gordon to make the team. He looked solid in his first game action. He's got NFL size. He's got a history of production as a rusher and a receiver. Just kind of a classic running back you want on your bench, just in case he finds himself in a starting role, even for a game or two. It just makes sense to have an Ollie Gordon on your bench. Woody Marks comes next for the Texans. You might expect to see him higher with Mixon injured and Chubb apparently looking totally washed in practice. I just don't see him as much of a rusher. I think he was always more of a passing down specialist in college. I think he's more of like a Dare Agumbawale type. And he's also like super old. So I don't see a huge ceiling here. Obviously a guy that needs to be rostered because he could be kind of a co-starter at the beginning of the year, but tempering expectations. And then we have a series of wide receivers here in Alec Iomanner, Keandre Lambert-Smith, Dante Thornton, Isaac Tesla, and one more running back at the very end in Trevor Etienne. Alec Iomanner thought he was going to go higher in the draft. He went on day 3. He did play a little bit with the first team offense, though, in preseason game 1. It's a very shallow depth chart. Ridley and Tyler Lockett appear to be the only guys ahead of him right now. And so, yeah, there's opportunity there with Cam Ward. Could be a better passing game this year. Definitely worth the stash. Keandre Lambert-Smith had a big day in the Hall of Fame game for the Chargers. He's been regularly making plays in training camp. And with Ladd, Keenan, Harris, Quentin Johnson ahead of him, the path is definitely murky. It's hard to see how he's even going to get on the field. But ultimately, we want to bet on talent, right? Then with Dante Thornton, it's kind of the opposite, where I'm a little skeptical of the talent in the sense that he wasn't that productive in college, had a very limited route tree, but he's really stolen Jack Besh's thunder in training camp. He might already be a starting wide receiver for the Raiders. I don't know how excited I can get about him as like a standalone asset because he's kind of a one-trick pony. He feels like a pure deep threat that's going to open up space for Bowers and Myers more than anything. But you can't ignore this kind of steam for a day 3 wide receiver. Like it's very rare that you see a player like this being pushed up the depth chart so quickly. And then we get to Isaac Tesla, great athlete. The Lions weirdly traded 3 third-round picks to acquire him, which I guess means something. He's made plays in both of his preseason games so far. And yeah, it's another crowded offense, but he could push for that third wide receiver spot over Tim Patrick sooner rather than later. So, and he went in third round. I mean, he went in the third round. Like, that's not nothing. It's the same round Jalen Noel went in. So I guess you can really only ignore him for so long. And then we'll finish with Trevor Etienne, one of the earlier backs taken on day 3. He went after Tootin and Scatabo, I believe, to the Panthers. Probably the RB3 right now behind Chuba Hubbard and Rico Dowdle, but he's got some pass catching skills. He's kind of versatile. I don't know. It kind of falls off after Tesla. I'm not that excited about ETN. There's some other guys you could stash, but he's got the skill set. He's on the team for sure. 4th round draft capital gives him a little bit of security. So that's about all I can say for Trevor Etienne, but he does make the cut inside of the top 48. Anyway, that's going to do it for today, guys. As always, thanks so much for watching the video. Thank you for supporting the channel. If you made it through that much content about 2025 rookies, you must be enjoying the video. So go ahead and hit the subscribe button down below. Really helps me out. And if you want to see even more Dynasty content from me, check out the membership options. There's a link in the description. You can hit the plus sign on the subscribe button. That gives you access to weekly live streams, private channels in the Pure Potential Discord, as well as my top 250 Dynasty rankings. Either way, I'll be back soon with another Dynasty video, and I hope I'll see you then.